great to have Dr. Davenport join us. I attended one of his talks a few months ago in the fall and really enjoyed it, and reached out to Tom, and he was very gracious to join us. Tom is a leading authority in this area of artificial intelligence and business applications. We could really fill the whole hour talking about his background, but I won't do that. We're also pleasantly surprised to know that he's a Falmouth resident. When speaking with Tom, he mentioned that some of the ideas for his work were generated in some of the many Falmouth coffee shops. So we're really happy to have him. A couple things on logistics. We will break about midway for questions. So if you have questions, please use the chat. Don't break into the audio. I'll be monitoring the chat as we always do, and feeding those questions to Tom. So with that, I'll turn it over. Again, welcome, Tom. We're very happy to have you here.
Great. Thanks, Ed and Bert. I'm coming to you all the way from the Oxford University Library, where I'm a visiting professor. Actually, that's just a virtual background. They said, you're welcome to come and visit with us, but we're not here, so maybe you shouldn't bother. So I'm hoping that next year I can go over there. I don't know. Oh, okay, now we'll share my screen. So I'm going to talk with you about artificial intelligence this morning, and we could spend a lot more than an hour on this subject, but I'll talk about some of the areas where I have done a fair amount of research and have some expertise. And if you have some questions about other areas, feel free to ask them. I may also feel free to say, I don't know enough about that to provide a good answer. It's become quite an exploding field these days. I'll be talking about AI in business and really in larger organizations, because they have been the ones that have been most active in adopting AI. I'm happy to talk about the prospects for AI in small businesses if anybody has any questions about that. Artificial intelligence is hard enough to define that one leading researcher said he wasn't going to do it anymore. He wasn't going to provide a definition anymore. I will define it, but note that there is no perfect definition, and the one that I like has some flaws. People talk about it as a group of technologies. It certainly is a collection of technologies, not just one, that can do tasks that previously only human brains could do, things like reasoning and perception, decision-making certainly, and some other tasks requiring knowledge. However, some of the things that AI does, like a big machine learning model, could never have been done by a human brain. Our brains just can't handle large amounts of data and analysis. And then there's some debate about whether some technology should be included or not. There's a quite popular technology called robotic process automation that does structured back office tasks. Certainly, I think of it as only being done by humans in the past, but some people say it's not smart enough. And then statistical machine learning, machine learning is based on statistics, is the most common form of AI to my view. But some people say, well, it's been around for long enough so that it's not really artificial intelligence. And in fact, there's this general feeling that if AI really works, nobody thinks of it as AI anymore. We have technologies like optical character recognition, the things that read your checks. The machines that read your checks have been around for 30 years or so, and they use a form of AI. They're getting better and better with new AI. Some people say, that's not really AI anymore. I think the different types of AI are somewhat confusing, so I often talk about three levels of thinking about AI. One is, what are the underlying tools? And as I said, machine learning is based on statistics. There are rule-based systems that are based on logic, sort of if-then type statements. And then there is a branch of natural language processing that's based on semantics, the relationships between words. But there's also a branch of natural language processing that is, in fact, somewhat more popular now and more, I think, effective, that is based on statistics, machine learning. So then you have these AI methods, things like neural networks, deep learning, and machine learning. Neural networks and deep learning are subsets of machine learning. Rule engines, I think, if you are as old as I am and you were around during the last phase of enthusiasm about AI in the late 80s and early 90s, rule engines were the dominant method, and people call them expert systems. They have some nice attributes. It's easy to sort of figure out how they work, a bunch of if-then statements, but when you have a lot of them, they don't really scale very well, and they're hard to maintain. But still, my research suggests that about half of large companies still have some rule engines in place, and they are one of the key technologies behind robotic process automation. And natural language processing, as I say, can be based on semantics or it can be based on statistics. The powerful NLP tools today are based on statistics. And then you have all these applications like recognizing images or recognizing speech, intelligent agents or chatbots, intelligent robots. Most robots have not been terribly intelligent in the past. They have to be sort of pre-programmed, but they're getting more so, and you have these collaborative robots or cobots now. Prediction and classification are the primary applications of machine learning, and then robotic process automation, as I say, is mostly based on rules and the ability to kind of reach into a lot of different information systems and extract information from them. To simplify things a bit, a few years ago, I studied 152 AI projects, and about half of them were what people are now increasingly calling robotics and intelligent automation, sort of adding a bit of intelligence to robotic process automation for, as I said, routine, data-intensive kind of back office tasks. And then you have what might be called AI-based insights, sort of analytics. I studied analytics for 10 or 15 years before I studied AI, and machine learning is basically sort of analytics on steroids. It's predictive statistical insights from structured data, rows and columns of numbers. And then you have engagement-oriented systems, typically language-oriented for chatting with customers in a customer service environment, or sometimes employees in a human resources environment. Those tended to be somewhat less common, and I think they're still somewhat less common because language is a really tough thing to do really well, and we have a lot of low quality language-based engagement systems, but to do the high quality ones is really quite difficult and expensive, although getting less so over time. So in late 2020, where we are, I'll sort of give you a kind of overview of the state of AI. About 40% of large companies are doing AI now, growing all the time. I recently increased it, looked at some new surveys. It used to be 25 to 30. Now I think 40 is a better number across the globe. A few of them are really quite aggressive with this technology, calling themselves AI first or AI fueled. Most are much less aggressive, and I'll talk about that in greater detail. There's a challenge that we have, there are a lot of experiments and pilots with AI, but getting systems into production deployment seems to be a challenge. I'll say more about that too. Companies have a lot of different objectives beyond, automating humans out of a job. In fact, that ranks low in their objective list. But in one survey that I did with Deloitte, 63% of US executives whose companies were using AI said they want to automate as many jobs as possible to cut costs. So I'll talk a little bit about that issue of AI and jobs. I wrote a book about it, and I'm working on another book, but that's a big subject too. I generally feel that less ambitious AI projects are much more likely to be successful than highly ambitious ones. Maybe that's probably true of any technology, but we think of these great moonshots like curing cancer and so on. And the fact is they haven't worked out all that well thus far. The good news is the more experienced a company is with AI, the more bullish, positive it is about it. We've had some problems recently in the pandemic economy because machine learning, like any other statistical prediction approach, is based on past data. And it turns out past data right now are not a very good guide to current and future behavior. So our predictive models aren't working very well, particularly for things like consumer demand. So we're not predicting high enough for toilet paper, and I was just listening this morning to the news where movie going is not likely to resume in substantial numbers in theaters until 2022 or so. So our past data would over-predict our appetite for movies in theaters or sports or whatever. And I think because of the pandemic, there is an increased focus on these automation technologies. I was talking yesterday with someone at a large advertising agency in New York that's created a chief automation officer, not over all AI, but just the automation component of AI, like robotic process automation. So this is a chart that I do some work with Deloitte as a senior advisor, and this is from our most recent survey on the state of enterprise AI. And you look at these technologies, and about in the 50 to 60, high 60% say they're using things like machine learning now, natural language processing, deep learning, and computer vision, and so on. Robotic process automation comes from an earlier survey. For some reason, my Deloitte colleagues did not include it this year. I think there's another group at Deloitte that's responsible for that. But if you look at what they say they're going to do next year, it's virtually all of these companies. So, I think in surveys there tends to be a little bit of over optimism about what plans are going to be accomplished in the next year, but people are planning to do quite a lot with all of these different technologies. I mentioned I'd talk about objectives, and we've asked this question for several years now, and the most common ones tend to be making our processes more efficient, supply chain and customer relationships and so on, enhancing existing products and services, which is, I think, a relatively new thing, making processes more efficient and improving decision-making. Those are both the most likely to be sought after and the most likely to be achieved thus far. Those are kind of things we did with analytics as well, even going back to business intelligence. But making our products and services more intelligent is I think, something relatively new. And in fact, the previous couple of years, that was the #1 objective for companies. Note that if you're a human on this, and most of you look human, I know you could be very lifelike robots, reducing headcount is the lowest objective sought and the lowest achieved thus far. Now, I agree that it is probably the lowest achieved. I talk to companies every day, and none of them have said, oh yeah, we've laid off a ton of people because of AI. And in fact, my economist friends tell me that this is a bit of a problem. If we're not laying anybody off because of AI, that means we're not getting any productivity improvements from AI. But I'm not sure that it's the lowest objective sought. As I said, we had that, maybe it was a fluke, but we had that 63% saying that they wanted to eliminate as many jobs as possible to cut costs. So my guess is it's more sought than the, I don't know, 11% or so that say they're pursuing it, but I'm pretty sure it's not very well achieved thus far. So, as I said, companies have varying levels of aggressiveness about how they pursue AI, and some of them have sort of one big thing they're doing. That would be the case with Vanguard. Maybe some of you are Vanguard customers and you are at least aware of, they have this wealth management tool, often called a robo-advisor, called Personal Advisor Services, that is really the one major thing that they are doing. And it's been quite successful for them. I think the last time I checked, they had by far the most assets under management with about 150 billion. Still quite small compared to the number being advised by humans. But a lot of companies in that wealth management industry have those, Schwab and Fidelity to a somewhat lesser degree and so on. And then a step up would be a company like Pfizer, which has, as of several months ago, they had over 150 AI projects, probably a couple of hundred at least now. Most of them in marketing and sales. They had tried to do some things in drug development without much success. You may recall that IBM Watson was focused on that for a while. Most of, I think all of those projects have been declared unsuccessful at this point. And sadly, AI did not play much of a role in developing new vaccines for the coronavirus. Maybe for the next pandemic that we have, it will, but not so much this time. Capital One is a very aggressive company. They were quite aggressive on analytics. When I wrote about companies that competed on their analytical capabilities over a decade ago, they were my poster child, and now they're competing on their AI capabilities and have all sorts of projects for all sorts of purposes. And then probably the single most aggressive company in the world is Alphabet/Google, which declared several years ago that it wanted to be AI first and had several thousand projects underway, and of course search and ads, and they have Waymo and autonomous vehicle business and some healthcare businesses, all of which are doing work with AI in an aggressive way. You might say, well, just how aggressive are the projects they're pursuing? And so I'll give you 3 examples of organizations that pursued both moonshots in the left column and low-hanging fruit in the right column. And you may have heard about MD Anderson Cancer Center down in Houston, which tried to use IBM Watson to cure cancer, or at least treat cancer. And after 5 or 6 years developing this capability, the auditors of the University of Texas, who own MD Anderson, said, we're going to put the kibosh on this project. You spent $62 million so far and not treated a single patient, and no integration with electronic health record systems, and so we're not going to pursue it any further. Memorial Sloan Kettering has also been using Watson. They have not discontinued their project officially, but haven't made anywhere near the progress that they had hoped. But at MD Anderson, the IT department was pursuing several projects that were certainly much less ambitious. One, to help patients' families figure out where to stay and eat when they had a family member in the hospital, a care concierge. One, to predict the people who might have trouble paying their bills. The cynic might say so they could start harassing them early, but they would not say that, of course. And IT operations, which is the most common AI application in the world, I believe. All of those were quite successful. And the same goes for these other two organizations, at least to some degree. DBS, largest bank in Southeast Asia, trying to do a robo-advisor to recommend stocks and bonds, again, using Watson. Not successful. Watson just couldn't do some of the things they needed, like reading charts and graphs and so on. But they have been very successful with a chatbot in their bank in India. They reduced their ATMs running out of cash by 5,500%, and they predicted sales attrition. I also wrote a case study recently about their use of AI for anti-money laundering, which was very, very successful. Amazon, of course, I don't think there are any Amazon ghost stores yet on the Cape or even in Boston, but maybe some of you have been in them. I've been in 4 or 5. Every one I sort of half-heartedly try to shoplift just to see if I can beat the algorithm, and I have not been able to do that thus far. But you walk out supposedly without paying, and sadly, a few minutes later, you get a message on your smartphone saying, "Here's what you bought," and it's always been correct in my case. So that's a success. Although some people say it's the world's most expensive convenience store, and they still have people working in them, by the way. Drone delivery, at least the last time I checked, there were no Amazon packages being dropped off yet on my front stoop in Falmouth or Sarasota, Florida, by a drone. Jeff Bezos said they were coming in 2018, so they're at least late on that project. I don't, will probably happen at some point, knowing Amazon. But even Jeff Bezos said the great bulk of what they do with AI is in this low-hanging fruit category, things like detecting fraud and product recommendations and merchandising improvements. He called it quietly but meaningfully improving core operations. So I think for most organizations, you're much better off doing these less ambitious projects. AI is a very kind of small job, task-oriented technology. It can't replace a lot of tasks that even one person would do in a job. It certainly can't support an entire business process. So I think better suited to these less ambitious projects. I don't know, Ed, any questions in the chat area yet? You want to?
We do, Tom. Yeah, that'd be great. Good breaking point. Thank you. Really terrific talk so far. Actually, speaking of Amazon, Steve Tom had a question which was related to the Amazon effect, and I know you speak often with larger businesses, so it is related to small businesses, given the Cape-based service sector that we have. The question is around how AI might help small businesses survive and evolve. Some of these are facing extinction with the Amazon effect. And, I'll add to that you mentioned that AI is good for small task-oriented jobs. So if you do have any thoughts, we'd be interested in hearing those.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's good news and bad news about smaller businesses and AI. I mean, we have a ton of startups using AI, mostly kind of tech-oriented startups. Boston has thousands. The Bay Area of California has tens of thousands. So it's certainly possible. some of them expect a lot of venture funding and so on, which small businesses may not get. The other good news is AI is not terribly expensive in terms of either software or hardware. A lot of the software is free and open source. The hardware, more and more people are using the cloud, which you can buy in small quantities. I would say the limiting factor in small businesses is the human side. There's the talent is still somewhat expensive, although getting less so over time, and to do, to develop AI. And I think most small business managers don't have enough awareness of what AI can do for them to really explore it, and maybe the time. If you're in a small business, you spend most of your time getting product out the door or serving your customers every day, and you don't have the time to think about how might I use technology. But it's certainly possible, and there are examples. One of the companies that I work with is a relatively small business. Maybe some of you got a mortgage from them. It's called Radius Finance on the South Shore, and they do as much, I think, as you can possibly do with AI in terms of underwriting mortgages. They have a robotic process automation engine. They still, of course, have some humans, but they get mortgages done quite quickly and with relatively low amount of human involvement, and they're growing very rapidly. So I think it's an inspiring example of how a small to medium-sized organization can do really well with AI if you are motivated to do so.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. I think the other comment you've made is that there are technologies that really are AI, but may not be those type of moonshot applications. So there may be a lot of those that can help.
Yeah, robotic process automation certainly could do a lot of back office work for you. And some of the vendors of that technology are talking about, one robot per person. They're not expensive at all.
All right. We have two other questions, Tom. I'm not sure you'll be able to comment on this one. It's around DeepMind's recent work on protein folding. Is this machine mathematics? So if you're aware of DeepMind's work on protein folding.
I am. I read about it this week. It's, I guess, quite exciting. I'm not biological enough to know the details of protein folding, but DeepMind is a subsidiary of Google. They were acquired several years ago, and they have done path-breaking work in using this technology called deep learning, which is a version of neural networks, which is a subset of machine learning. It's just lots and lots and lots of variables, lots and lots and lots of data, training models to recognize, a chess game. They were quite strong in that. Go, they were the ones who developed AlphaGo, and now they've done something I think that benefits the world a little bit more, identifying what type of folding is going to happen in a protein, which I gather is quite significant for how a cell is going to express its genetic heritage, if you will. So again, it all uses deep learning. The problem with that technology is it does require very large amounts of data. There's a new tool you may have also heard of, not from DeepMind, but from OpenAI, which is mostly owned by Microsoft, I guess, now. And they developed a tool called GPT-3 that can converse and write English quite successfully. The problem is that it was trained on over 1 trillion pieces of data, It has 175 billion different parameters in it. Just a massive, massive, massive amount of data. It cost over $1 billion to develop. So that's not in the reach of the vast majority of companies. And a lot of people are starting to say, well, this deep learning approach, if it keeps getting bigger and bigger and more expensive like this, it's not really going to be that successful.
Okay, great. A couple other questions. We have one from John, if you can comment on who some of the main players are in robotic process automation, or RPA.
Sure. The key vendors are Blue Prism, which is UK based, Automation Anywhere, which is US based, UiPath, which oddly enough started in Romania, but is now based in the US, WorkFusion, which also started in Eastern Europe, but now is based in the US. Those, I think, are the 4 primary vendors of robotic process automation. And you know that they're all perfectly capable of doing most applications. I think the difference is some are a little bit more oriented to adding machine learning to their capabilities and making it intelligent process automation.
Okay, great. Just I think probably one more time, I'll let you get back to the talk, is sort of back to the sociology background. You showed the chart of the objectives and what folks are targeting as objectives and where they're successful, and how we don't see a lot of layoffs, but there's still that fear out there about machines starting to think without us. So if you have any further comments around that.
Yeah, well, I'll present on that. So why don't I?
Okay, that's a good segue then.
A minute or two, and then if there are more questions, I'm happy to.
Okay. Yeah, great.
So I want to mention briefly this issue with deployment. I won't go through all this detail, but there's a lot of survey data and a lot of market research data suggesting that deployment of AI systems is a problem. We experiment with it successfully, but we don't actually put it into production. And you know, that's because production applications require you to integrate with existing systems and business processes, and or probably retrain your people, maybe change some of your people out who don't have the right levels of skills. And so, you know, I think experimentation is fine, but we need to do more to really start to plan for deployment early on if we're going to get any economic value out of this type of technology. And as I say, part of the problem is there are just too many pilots around. One person told me, you know, we've got more AI pilots than there are pilots at O'Hare Airport, and many of them just never get converted into a production deployment. So if you're going to do a pilot, you know, plan all along for how do we move it into production. So I also argue that, you know, if we're going to get return on this technology, there are several things that we have to do, and I'm doing some research on return on AI, so that's what those letters stand for. So early in my work career, I did work on business process reengineering. Maybe some of you remember that idea, this idea we're going to change our business processes, often in a dramatic way, to take advantage of what a new technology can do. And we really need to do that with AI if we're going to get some productivity out of it. We need an organization and culture that is data-driven in the first place and kind of a fit with what we want to accomplish with AI. Many organizations are still, you know, based on intuition and experience rather than data. We need algorithms and data that are unbiased and transparent and well managed over time. You know, we have to constantly monitor them to make sure they're still, you know, making the right kinds of decisions. As I said, many of them are not in the post-pandemic economy. And then we need a lot of investment. There's some research suggesting that a production deployment is 100 times as expensive as a pilot. So we need to kind of plan for that from the beginning. And of course, clear metrics about how much value we're getting. Just a little bit on this issue of the coronavirus and what it's done for machine learning. I wrote a little piece in MIT Sloan Management Review with another guy. We called it Machine Learning Quarantine, because machine learning models learn from past data. The data doesn't reflect current reality. Our models won't be terribly good predictors. Somebody said, I think this was at Hanes Brands in our talks with data science leaders, 8 weeks of zeros really did a number on our demand forecasts. So what companies are doing is saying, well, we're not going to try to predict anymore. We're going to go back to descriptive analytics, or what we used to call business intelligence. At Ford, an executive screamed, just tell me how much we're selling. And the sad answer was at the time, not very much. Or seeking out new sources of data, usually external. So Ford was looking at its connected vehicle data to see how many miles or kilometers were being driven and how many people were doing internet searches for cars, and air pollution, which is sadly still a good predictor of how much we're driving. And then, the only good predictor now of things like demand is yesterday's demand. So we can't really predict much in the future, but we can look at the recent past. So on this issue of humans and what it's going to do to us, there are some people who are clearly quite smart, who are quite worried about this. Bill Gates is worried about superintelligence, and Elon Musk is well known for this. The late Stephen Hawking as well. That robot overlords are going to kill us all. Massive job loss. Bob Shiller is a Nobel Prize-winning economist from Yale, and he says it's the most important problem facing the world today. I'm not sure I agree with that. Riots in the streets. We'll soon be looking at hordes of citizens of zero economic value, these two Silicon Valley people said. So I tend to be a little more optimistic than that. But I think there is cause for concern that just as mechanical systems replaced manual labor in the 18th and 19th centuries, and transactional computing replaced administrative and service jobs in the 20th century, knowledge work jobs, the things that we all thought were safe, the reason we got a lot of education, et cetera, that's what AI is coming for in the 21st century. And so are we going to see massive job losses in knowledge workers? Or, even more in administrative workers? As I said, robotic process automation targets them even more. I tend to be, as I say, a little bit more optimistic, not a terribly conclusive answer to say yes and no, but there are a lot of job tasks that are being replaced. As I said, AI is a task-based technology, thus far anyway, but most of us do multiple tasks in our work, and so we wouldn't be totally replaced. Maybe some knowledge workers would lose their jobs on the margins. If we do some things that lawyers do with AI, which is already the case, things like document review in a large commercial litigation case, maybe we need 8 lawyers instead of 10. Some people would argue that that wouldn't be tragic for that we're sort of over-lawyered as a society anyway. There's a guy at Boston University who's done some research suggesting that we have about as many bank tellers now as we had in 1980, and that's was prior to ATMs and home banking and so on. So people find other things to do, and companies like Bank of America are making them digital concierges now to help you with your banking apps and so on. I can't believe that they haven't started to decline, because banks have started to close branches again too. But his research from 5 or 6 years ago suggested they were pretty constant. There are going to be a lot of jobs working alongside these smart machines, and if you are one of those job incumbents, or you know somebody who is, I'd love to hear about it. I'm writing a book now profiling people who work with AI on a day-to-day basis. In fact, I wrote one recently. There's a guy from the Cape. He actually used to be, he used to drive that Cape trash truck, the trash train, and then he was responsible for the Cape Flyer for a while down from Boston, and now he's the chief railroad engineer of the MBTA. He's developed a system to analyze oil in diesel locomotives for the commuter rail system in Boston and predict failures. So there are a lot of people in a lot of different jobs who are working alongside these intelligent technologies. The other good news is that if we do this well, we'll have plenty of productivity gains, so we could afford to retrain people and redeploy them into other jobs. You know, who knows whether we will do that or not. I think it was Andrew Yang had that as his platform, and he didn't get elected. So I don't know. Biden hasn't spoken up about it much, I don't think. He did say he wanted to do a lot more work on AI research and so on. But in general, I think there's no room for complacency in this area, and we all have to think about how do we add value to the machines that we work with. I often say, you know, the only people who are going to lose their jobs are the people who refuse to work with AI. So we have to be open and ready to learn. So just to conclude, and then I'm happy to take some more questions. I think, as I said, AI works best in small doses, and so you should start small, but it's important to think big about what you can accomplish with it. And you know, people often talk about AI in terms of this guy called Roy Amara had Amara's law. It's not quite as well known as Moore's law, but it said, you know, we tend to overestimate the effects of a technology in the short run and underestimate their effects in the long run. And I think that's definitely going to be the case with AI. It's hard to be a fast follower with this technology. It takes, you know, a lot of learning, a lot of accumulation of talent, a lot of data. So don't really ease up, particularly in this economy. I've talked to a number of companies who are kind of saying we're not hesitating. We're going to continue to invest in this, and those tend to be the companies that prosper during a difficult economy. One of my friends who works for a consulting firm says they're encouraging their clients to hold, fold, or double down, to sort of re-examine their portfolio of projects and say, which ones do we just continue, which ones aren't really that economically valuable, or which ones do we really need even more. And given the scarcity of economic resources now, I think that's an important thing to do if you have more than one project underway. Don't forget the humans. This photo, I hope, was taken pre-COVID. Nobody's wearing a mask anyway. But there is, at least the survey data that I've done suggests that there is already a substantial amount of job change happening from AI, and there's going to be even more. So we need to retrain, reskill, redeploy. There are a few companies, Amazon, JP Morgan Chase come to mind as spending considerable dollars in retraining people, but not enough yet. And I think human resources organizations need to step up and start to make this happen. As I said, you know, build a pipeline from the beginning toward full deployment. Don't just think, well, let's do a pilot and see what happens. You need some sort of governance in place. Our beloved Golden Dome State House in Boston. Some companies say they have strategies for AI in place. I haven't seen, frankly, the numbers that come up in the surveys, but they said they have centers of excellence. I think 37% said they already have an AI center of excellence. They have executives who are champions of AI technologies. They have strategies for putting technologies into deployment. So I think you can't wait in that regard either. And data is the lifeblood of AI. So if you have really screwed up data, you might want to work on that for a while, and then start working on AI. You probably won't be able to do much, at least not with machine learning, without some data to sort of train your models. So that is basically all I have to present. Happy to answer questions if you've got any, or take any comments.
We do, Tom. Thank you very much. Quite a few comments. A really terrific talk. Looks like a lot of interest, as we thought. A couple of questions around. I'll read one from Bruce. If you could comment on the alleged bias in AI systems due to issues with the massive. You've mentioned the massive data required. I know also the United Nations had some reports out this week about use of AI and profiling and the algorithms. So kind of a broad topic, but if you could comment on that.
Yeah. Well, there certainly is a possibility of bias. The bias is usually in the data that's used to train the model. So if you use data that is only from males, it's the algorithm is kind of, not surprisingly, end up being somewhat biased toward females. There are some suggestions that, not just suggestions, but some actual proof that deep learning image recognition models, facial recognition models recognize white faces more than darker faces. I think it's not intentional bias. It's a matter of how much light gets reflected off the face and how the algorithm deals with that. However, I would say it's important to remember that we humans are quite biased as well. In fact, I always recommend that if you want to study this a little bit, look up Wikipedia. In Wikipedia, the decision biases, and they're like 128 different types of them. So I am not sure at all that AI will be more biased than humans. In fact, in many cases, I think it'll be less biased than humans. I wrote a little piece recently about the use of AI in policing, suggesting that it could reduce bias in policing. Hard to prove, but clearly we have a lot of human bias in policing. But the Harvard Business Review decided it was too controversial a topic, and they weren't going to publish it. But we just have to remember, compared to what, when we talk about AI bias. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to prevent it. The fact that you hear about the same cases of bias over and over again suggests thus far we haven't found a lot of really biased AI systems, I think.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I've also heard comments about the diversity of the researchers themselves has certainly improved, and they're in tune to this, so that helps to avert that bias.
I think that is getting better, and certainly I see a lot of women and people of color working with data science in the companies that I work with. I don't know the exact numbers, and I'm not sure anybody's done a systematic study of that yet.
That's great. We have a couple of questions around the hype you'd mentioned around artificial intelligence, and whether you think, I think you made some comments early on, but about AI being an overused term, and whether or not there's another winter coming for AI, sort of a reckoning. And also related to that, I wanted to hear your prediction on achieving superintelligence. So back to the idea about robotics and
I'm less of a technologist than sort of a business researcher and a sociologist. But when you ask technologists how far in advance superintelligence is, they tend to say a long time. I'll be dead by the time it comes, and many of you will be too. So I guess that's one less thing to worry about. I think the average in one survey of AI experts was 75 years before we get full superintelligence. We tend to kind of overestimate how quickly these things are going to happen, as we did very much so for autonomous vehicles. There were all sorts of predictions that they'd be on the streets by now. Elon Musk is probably one of the worst offenders in this regard. He was going to have a large fleet of fully autonomous, non-human driven taxis out in 2020. Now he's backed away from that a bit. I've had 2 Teslas now. Frankly, neither of them are really capable of being self-driving. If you want to kill yourself, rely fully on the quote autopilot capabilities there. So I think we do, again, overestimate it in the short run, but in the long run, I think it's going to be a very important factor in our society, and we shouldn't ignore it. And I don't think we'll go back into another serious winter. There are some excesses. Someone commented on IBM Watson, I see, and it was clearly an example of the triumph of marketing hype over technical capability. It had a fair amount of technical capability, but not nearly as much as there was marketing hype. And it took 10 years for them to beat Jeopardy, and to think that, let's move on to curing cancer as our next thing is a really bad idea.
Okay. Question back to around humans, and I'll group some of these. There's a question about how do you see the academic community responding to the need for retraining you had mentioned, and directing education, and a related question about the Chinese, probably the Chinese government, what's being referred to here as training 10 million AI engineers. So looking at it from a couple different facets in terms of retraining folks for jobs. I like what you had to say about working side by side with AI, but then this whole concept of leadership on AI technology.
Yeah, there hasn't been a big move yet by educational institutions. There's some bright spots. This afternoon, I'm doing a webinar with a Canadian university that has done a program with KPMG to educate accountants about AI and how it might change their jobs and what kinds of innovations they might help to develop. I thought, fantastic idea, but we don't have too many programs of that type yet, I would say. Maybe it's a little bit early, but certainly I think we can pick some areas that are clearly going to be affected by AI, and we ought to start educating people to think about what some of those changes might be. China is, I think, certainly from a governmental standpoint, putting more resources into AI than our government has. I am quite worried about them taking the global lead in this area. The Trump administration, paid it lip service, but didn't really do very much in the AI space. Biden says that he's going to put more resources into researching it and so on, but obviously we don't know about that yet. So, but yes, I am worried about it, and it's too bad that we certainly had an early lead. And much of it, I think, has already been eroded because the Chinese have really set out to dominate that field. They are, I think, in a lot of ways behind the average U.S. corporation in terms of even having good data and so on. But these consumer-oriented firms have massive amounts of data. The government is not particularly worried about using that data for intelligence purposes and facial recognition purposes. So their lack of freedom, I think, gives them a slight advantage in AI as well.
Okay, great. I want to be cognizant of the time. Really terrific discussion. And we forgot to ask Dr. Davenport if you have time after 9 o'clock for a few more questions. Or?
Yeah, a couple of minutes I have.
Okay.
I do. I confess that I have a tennis game at 9:30. So.
Oh, we won't hold you.
I work all the time down here in Florida, but otherwise, why come to Florida?
There you go. Well, we won't hold you up then. But certainly a really great discussion, and we could, it's a broad topic we could keep talking on. I would encourage everyone to follow Dr. Tom Davenport on social media and certainly in the press, and check out his books. He operates, as you've seen, in the academic field, but also in business. So a lot of the books are really approachable and great read.